We know we all look like we graduated in 1996, but every time I get on the metro in Washington and someone offers me a seat, I look around to see where the pregnant woman is. But when Max Hittle called me a couple months ago and asked if I would represent the class of 1966 on the occasion of our 50th reunion, my first thought was, drat. Not enough time to get a facelift. Probably enough time to lose 10 pounds, but I didn't do that either. But I stand here today incredibly proud to be representing my class, the best, the class of 1966. Not technically baby boomers, unless there were some precocious among us who graduated at age 20, but not part of the previous silent generation either. We were the groundbreakers. The world around us shifted dramatically during our 4 years here. We were not innocent bystanders on that shifting ground. Because of the intense debates and intellectual discourse that went on in classrooms and living units at DePauw, we helped to shape the world to come, even as it shaped us. I would venture to say that few years in modern history were as tumultuous as 1962 to 1966. Just think about the following, and Ken Owen took us through some of this yesterday, but think about the following. From October 16th to October 28th, 1962, exactly 1 month after our arrival here, as we were still getting used to doing our own laundry, getting in before 10 o'clock curfew if we were women, or fraternity rush if we were men, the world almost came to an end with the Cuban Missile Crisis. For 12 long days on this peaceful campus, we hung under the threat of nuclear war. This was real. And in our classes and dorms and fraternity houses, we pondered whether our first college year might be our last. At the same time, by October 1962, virtually all the men in the class had turned 18 and had registered for the draft. By 1963, our sophomore year, the civil rights movement was reaching a crescendo. In April 1963, we read Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail and believed, as he wrote, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And in August 1963, we listened again to Dr. King's words during the March on Washington as he said, "I have a dream." On November 22nd, as we were crossing the Asbury Quad on our way to our 2 p.m. classes, yes, Virginia, there were Friday afternoon classes in those days. The dream shattered as we learned of President Kennedy's assassination in Dallas. February 1964. Who could forget watching the Beatles as they performed "I Want to Hold Your Hand" on the Ed Sullivan Show? Of course, that early Sunday night curfew was in place, holding the women hostage in their living units. So in the Tridelt house, 60 of us gathered around the 12-inch black and white TV set in the basement rec room, the only TV in the house, and screamed. And sang along. Johnson defeated Goldwater in the November elections. We couldn't vote, but man, we debated. But by then, Congress had passed the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, giving the president the power to wage all-out war in North Vietnam without a formal declaration of war. It began to look as if some of those draft registrations might be more than just mere pieces of paper. I could go on, but I think I have made the point that those years shaped the reality of the world we still live in. There is a direct line from the standoff of Kennedy and Khrushchev to the standoff of ISIS in Iraq. From Dr. King's "Injustice Anywhere is a Threat to Justice Everywhere" to Black Lives Matter. From Goldwater to Trump, and from the Beatles to Hamilton. There are some who believe everything they know they learned in kindergarten. But I know everything I know I learned at DePauw. Of course, it began with our families. Many of us were first-generation Americans, and even more of us first-generation college students. Our parents were gravely affected by the Great Depression and the Second World War. I'm not sure they were the greatest generation, but they wanted to give us a future that was better than the past. And to a large part, they did. And they supported us at DePauw, even though many thought the books we read here and the ideas we didn't hesitate to impose on family gatherings were liberal poppycock. My father handed me a check made out to me on Freshman Sunday, 1962, for $10,500. He said, "This is the money your mother and I have saved for your college education. We think a DePauw education is the best use of this money. But if you drop out, the money is still yours. And if you run out of money, write to me, and I will sign a work permit for you." With DePauw's annual tuition, room, and board at $2,550 per year, the amount was just enough. Through supplemental summer earnings and Christmas gifts, I had enough to get me through 4 years and get my first paycheck from the federal government before I ran out of Dad's money. Lessons learned: independence, thrift, sensible money management, trust, discipline, setting limits. Those were the family and solid Midwestern values. From DePauw came the lofty ideals, the intellectual curiosity, and the wanderlust. The world was a big place. Injustices needed to be righted. Just wars about ideas needed to be fought. Women also deserved equal rights. When I declared I had no interest in being a mother, a teacher, or a nurse, my father said, "I hope you know how to type." But through a DePauw opportunity, the Washington semester program, where I spent spring semester 1965, I learned in the federal civil service there was equal pay for equal work. That was very appealing. And so I devoted my senior year to preparing for the federal service entrance exam and started my career as a presidential management intern at the U.S. Information Agency in August 1966, paid the grand sum of $6,478 per annum, twice what a beginning teacher or nurse earned. From experiences on this campus also came emotional intelligence and leadership skills, as well as the ability to sleep anywhere and eat anything. Classroom presentations and debates in and out of the classroom honed skills to synthesize information and present it logically and persuasively, and to argue and defend positions with male faculty and male students. Sorority life meant communal living with women and practicing democratic governance when at any given moment 20% of the population was suffering from PMS or a breakup of a romance. Running an embassy is simple by comparison. And sleeping on the top bunk in the cold dorm and eating some of the concoctions prepared by Indiana farm women and served at the Tridelt House made sleeping on overnight flights and eating sheep's eyes in a Druze village in Israel, because to do otherwise would have brought shame to the hosts, a piece of cake. From my roommate, Sally Gifford Mannion, I learned that a handbag has to be big enough to carry a jar of peanut butter, just in case, and you'll see that my bag does that. I spent 25 years rising in the ranks of the Foreign Service to become an ambassador, during which time the Vietnam War ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, the Berlin Wall came down, and women's rights progressed. Early in my career, when I learned that married women couldn't be in the Foreign Service, they had to be sort of like nuns, my like-minded colleagues and I formed the Women's Action Organization at the State Department and threatened to sue. 3 years later, I was assigned to India, and Tom Grooms became the first male dependent spouse in the Foreign Service. I believe that if Hillary is elected president, Bill should ask Tom for some pointers. I wrote the line in Ronald Reagan's 1987 speech, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." So when the Berlin Wall actually came down, what I had come into the Foreign Service to do, that is to promote liberal democracy and free market capitalism, was done. It was time to find something new. A perfect opportunity arose. One evening at the ambassador's residence in Trinidad, I was hosting a dinner for a visiting vice president from the Texaco Oil Company. After consuming a couple of glasses of wine, he leaned over to me and in a very conspiratorial tone said, "The wife and I have been in 67 countries. So when I retire from Texaco, I want to get myself one of those ambassador jobs. What do you think?" "Oh," I said, "I think that's a great idea. I've been in more than 67 gas stations." So when I retire from the Foreign Service, I want to get myself one of those Texaco vice presidencies. What do you think? He did not reply. Seriously, I believed then, and I do now, that the most important battles were not those between enemy nations or opposing ideologies, so much as against common enemies, such as poverty, illiteracy, and disease. The biggest issue I saw in 1995 was the growing HIV/AIDS pandemic threatening to destroy both families and nations. So I went to work for the United Nations to help address the challenge. I talked to the Pope about condoms. To Nelson Mandela about his time as a prisoner on Robben Island when all the prisoners were tested for AIDS and the HIV-positive ones were locked into a separate cell. And I attended Princess Di's funeral at Westminster Abbey to represent her work on AIDS prevention. We managed to get the world's attention and funding to help discover new drugs which allow millions of HIV-positive people to live longer and better lives, and to help African countries stem the tide of new infections. So once more, I was out of a job. I'm currently working on cancer. That should take a few years. So I'll let you know how it comes out at our 60th reunion. Meanwhile, I'm thrilled that my step-granddaughter, Sandra Lacerna, and my great-niece, Amelia Smerz, will be members of the DePauw class of 2020. Sandra was born in Mexico to a Mexican father and an American-born-in-Mexico mother, and lived there until she was 12. She arrived in the U.S. speaking very little English, but graduated in the top 5% of her high school class in Geneva, Illinois. A generous financial package from DePauw means she'll graduate debt-free. Amelia's father, my nephew Tim Smerz, was born on our very day of graduation, May 29th, 1966, 50 years ago. Amelia is the principal cellist in the Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra. She visited campus a few years ago when Mark McCoy and I spoke to a DePauw dialogue session, which also included a flash mob performance with Yo-Yo Ma. All the rest is history. Amelia will enter the School of Music in the fall. The decisions to choose DePauw by these two wonderful young women, Amelia, who represents my genetic heritage and my Midwestern roots, and Sandra, my attempt to be a citizen of the world, could not please me more. I know what they learn here, and the experiences they have with faculty, staff, and fellow students will make them forever different and better citizens of this planet. We owe a lot to this place. So let's keep on keeping on. There's still a lot to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally.